In the village of whispered echoes, where time moved like honey through ancient oaks, lived a peculiar soul named Lumineth Dawnweaver. She possessed hands that seemed to catch starlight and eyes that held the depth of forgotten lakes. Each morning, Lumineth would wake before the world remembered itself, stepping barefoot across cobblestones that had witnessed 1,000 summers pass like gentle sighs. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of her gift, the ability to find springs that healed not flesh but the weary corners of hearts grown heavy with the weight of existence. Today, as copper-colored leaves danced their final waltz with autumn wind, Lumineth felt the familiar pull toward the whispering woods, where ancient trees kept secrets older than memory itself. Her footsteps created a soft rhythm against the forest floor, a meditation in motion that seemed to synchronize with the breathing of the earth beneath her feet. Moss-covered stones guided her path like emerald breadcrumbs, leading deeper into a realm where sunlight filtered through branches in golden ribbons, painting everything in shades of peace. The forest spoke in languages older than words. The gentle creak of oak arms stretching toward sky, the soft percussion of acorns finding their earthen beds, the whispered conversations between leaves preparing for their graceful surrender to winter's embrace. Lumineth listened with more than her ears, feeling each sound resonate through her bones like tuning forks touched by divine hands. As she walked, her mind settled into the rhythm that healers know well, that place between sleeping and waking where miracles hide in plain sight. Her breathing deepened, matching the slow pulse of sap through tree veins, her heartbeat aligning with the ancient drumming of roots, communicating through soil networks invisible to hurried eyes. The path wound deeper, past clearings where deer had once gathered in morning mist, past hollow logs that housed families of creatures who understood the art of living quietly. Each step carried her further from the noise of human striving, deeper into the sanctuary where nature kept its most precious gifts hidden from those who sought with grasping hands rather than open hearts. Through gaps in the canopy, she glimpsed patches of sky the color of robin eggs, soft and infinite as the dreams of sleeping children. The air grew thicker with something indefinable, not just the scent of earth and growing things, but the weight of possibility itself, as if the forest were holding its breath in anticipation of something beautiful about to unfold. Birds called to each other in voices like silver bells, their songs weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to hold the very essence of contentment. Lumineth found herself humming along without conscious thought, her voice blending with the forest symphony until she could no longer tell where her song ended and the woods began. The trees grew taller. Here, their trunks, wider than embracing arms, could span their bark, telling stories through intricate patterns of growth and healing, of seasons weathered and wisdom earned through countless cycles of birth, death, and renewal. She pressed her palm against one ancient giant, feeling the slow, steady pulse of life that had been beating since before her grandmother's grandmother drew her first breath. Time seemed to stretch and soften in this sacred space, minutes becoming meaningless as her spirit aligned with rhythms older and deeper than the ticking of clocks. The forest was teaching her its greatest lesson, that healing begins when we stop rushing toward destinations and start dwelling fully in the journey itself. Deeper into the heart of the whispering woods, Lumineth encountered the first of many guardians that protected the sacred places from those who sought healing with impure intentions. a magnificent stag emerged from behind a curtain of hanging willow branches, his antlers adorned with morning dew that caught the filtered sunlight like a crown of diamonds. His eyes held the wisdom of countless seasons, and in their depths Lumineth saw reflections not of herself, but of her truest intentions. The stag regarded her with the patient stillness that only wild creatures possess, that quality of being completely present in each moment without the human burden of past regrets or future anxieties. His breathing was slow and deep, each exhale visible in the cool morning air like small prayers rising toward the canopy above. Lumineth found her own breath naturally synchronizing with his feeling, her heartbeat slow to match the peaceful rhythm of his presence. Without breaking eye contact, she lowered herself to sit cross-legged upon the soft carpet of fallen leaves, her movements slow and deliberate as a meditation in themselves. The forest floor welcomed her with the accumulated softness of countless autumns, each layer telling its own story of seasons that had passed, like waves upon some distant shore of time. The stag took one step closer, then another, until his warm breath touched her face like a blessing from the ancient world. In that moment of communion, Lumineth felt something shift within her consciousness, as if a door had opened to rooms in her soul she had never known existed. The boundary between herself and the forest began to dissolve, and she experienced the peculiar sensation of being both deeply rooted and infinitely expansive at the same time. Through the stag's eyes, she began to see the forest as it truly was. Not just a collection of trees and creatures, but a living, breathing entity with its own consciousness, its own dreams, its own capacity for love and healing. Every root system connected to every other in an underground network of communication more sophisticated than any human invention, carrying messages of warning, sharing nutrients, offering support to the weak and celebrating the strong. The stag's presence filled her with a profound understanding that healing was not something one possessed or controlled, but rather something one became a channel for like a river, allowing water to flow through it without claiming ownership of the current. Her hands, resting gently on her knees, began to tingle with a warmth that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, rising through her body like sap through the trunk of a tree awakening from winter's sleep. As this realization settled into her bones, the stag stepped back and nodded once, a gesture so distinctly human-like that it might have seemed comical in any other setting. But here in this place, where the boundaries between species blurred like watercolors in rain, it felt perfectly natural acknowledgement between two souls who understood each other without need for words. He turned and began to walk deeper into the forest, his hooves making no sound upon the soft earth, moving with the fluid grace of water over stones. Lumineth rose to follow her own footsteps, now equally silent, as if the forest had taught her its secret language of movement without disturbance of presence, without intrusion. The path they traveled seemed to shift and change with each step, not in any dramatic way, but subtly, like the way dreams rearrange themselves when we're not paying attention. What had been a deer trail moments before now resembled something more ancient, worn smooth by the passage of countless seekers over centuries of searching. Stones appeared that seemed placed by intention rather than chance, their surfaces carved with symbols that spoke directly to the heart rather than the mind. The air grew softer here, if such a thing were possible, filled with the kind of peace that comes not from the absence of sound, but from the presence of perfect harmony. Even the quality of light seemed different, more golden, more alive, as if each ray carried within it the blessing of every sunrise that had ever painted these woods with morning's first promise. Birds sang in languages. She almost understood their melodies, weaving together into a symphony that seemed designed specifically for this moment, this journey. This seeker, walking behind a mystical stag toward a destination she could feel in her bones, but could not yet name. The music wrapped around her like a gentle embrace, supporting her steps and easing the last remnants of worldly worry from her shoulders. With each breath, Lumineth felt herself becoming more transparent, less solid, as if she were slowly transforming from flesh and bone into something more akin to morning mist or evening shadow. This sensation brought no fear, only a deep sense of rightness, as if she were finally becoming what she had always been meant to be. Not separate from the world around her, but an integral part of its breathing, beating, ever-expanding heart. The stag led Lumineth through groves where the trees seemed to lean inward, creating natural cathedrals with their interwoven branches. Shafts of light descended through these living windows like pillars of gold, each beam carrying tiny dancers, particles of pollen and forest dust that swirled in patterns too beautiful to be accidental. The very air seemed to pulse with gentle energy, as if the woods were breathing deeply in meditation, drawing in peace with each inhalation and releasing love with every exhale. Ancient ferns unfurled beside the path like green prayers written in a script older than human memory. Their fronds caught droplets of moisture that had settled during the night, creating tiny mirrors that reflected not just light, but the essence of serenity itself. Lumineth noticed how each drop held within it an entire world, clouds and sky and infinite possibility captured in perfect temporary spheres that would soon return to the earth to nourish new growth. The forest floor beneath her feet grew softer, still cushioned by centuries of leaves that had surrendered themselves to become soil, their individual identities dissolved into something greater and more generous than they could have achieved alone. With each step, Lumineth felt herself being supported not just by the ground, but by the accumulated wisdom of countless seasons, the patient teaching of trees that had learned the secret of standing still while growing ever upward toward light. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the gentle murmur of water over stones, a sound that spoke directly to something primitive and peaceful in her soul. The melody was hypnotic, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself, promising rest to all who had traveled far and carried heavy burdens. The stag's ears twitched towards the sound, and his pace quickened slightly, though he maintained the unhurried dignity that marked all his movements. As they walked, Lumineth became aware of other presences in the forest, not threatening, but watchful, benevolent. She glimpsed fleeting shadows that might have been deer or foxes, or perhaps something more mystical altogether. Eyes seemed to observe her passage from behind trees and beneath fallen logs, but these gazes carried no judgment, only the curious interest of creatures who recognized a fellow seeker of peace. A family of rabbits emerged from a thicket of wild roses, their movements creating no disturbance in the perfect stillness of the morning. They sat in a semicircle, as if gathered for some woodland council, their dark eyes reflecting the same deep wisdom she had seen in the stag. One smaller than the rest, with fur like spun moonlight, approached close enough that Lumineth could see the delicate pink of its nose twitching as it caught her scent, reading her intentions like a book written in languages older than words. The rabbit's presence filled her with an unexpected wave of tenderness, reminding her of the vulnerability that exists at the heart of all seeking the courage required to venture into unknown territories in search of healing. She felt a kinship with this small creature, recognizing in its gentle boldness the same spirit that had led her away from familiar paths into this realm where magic disguised itself as everyday forest life. Above them, the canopy had grown so thick that only scattered coins of sunlight reached the forest floor, creating a dimness that was not dark but deeply restful, like the quality of light in dreams or in the moments just before sleep takes hold. The air here was cooler, rich with the scent of moss and growing things, carrying hints of the water that sang somewhere ahead, promising refreshment for spirits grown weary from too much seeking and not enough simply being. The stag paused beside a tree whose trunk was so wide that 20 people holding hands could not have encircled it, its bark carved with natural spirals that seemed to draw the eye inward and upward simultaneously. He pressed his nose against the ancient wood, breathing deeply, and Lumineth felt compelled to do the same. The moment her palm touched the rough surface, she felt a pulse. Not quite physical, not quite emotional, but something that encompassed both and more. Through that touch, she sensed the tree's long memory. Centuries of storms, weathered droughts, endured seasons of abundance celebrated. She felt the patient strength that comes from being deeply rooted, the wisdom that accumulates when one learns to bend without breaking, to grow slowly but surely toward whatever light is available. The tree had stood here when her great-grandmother was young, would likely stand here long after she herself had returned to dust, and somehow this knowledge brought not sadness but profound comfort. The stag moved on, and they continued deeper into the forest's heart, where the very air seemed to thicken with possibility. Lumineth found her thoughts growing quieter, her usual mental chatter fading into a peaceful silence that felt more natural than any conversation she had ever held. Her breathing had synchronized completely with the rhythm of her walking, creating a moving meditation that required no effort, no conscious direction, only surrender to the wisdom of the body and the guidance of the mystical creature leading her toward whatever healing awaited in the depths of these ancient woods. Streams of light continued to find their way through the canopy, but now they seemed less like illumination and more like blessings, touching her shoulders and warming her face with the gentle affection of a love too vast to comprehend, but impossible to doubt. The sound of water grew stronger now, not louder in any harsh sense, but deeper, more present, like the way a mother's heartbeat becomes more noticeable to a child as sleep approaches. The stag's steps took on a different quality, more purposeful, yet somehow even more graceful, as if he were approaching something sacred that demanded both reverence and joy. Lumineth felt her pulse quicken slightly, not with anxiety, but with the kind of anticipation that comes when the soul recognizes it is approaching home. The forest began to change around them in subtle ways. The trees grew taller, still, their trunks smoother, as if polished by centuries of gentle touches from passing pilgrims. Vines draped between the branches like nature's own tapestries, woven with flowers she had never seen before. Blooms that seemed to glow with their own inner light petals, the color of moonbeams and starlight, and all the peaceful moments between sunset and dawn. A butterfly with wings like stained glass windows drifted past her face, its flight pattern so lazy and content that watching it made her feel drowsy in the most pleasant way. It landed briefly on her outstretched hand, its tiny feet lighter than breath against her skin, and for a moment she felt as if she could understand its simple, perfect existence. No striving, no wanting, just being exactly what it was meant to be in this exact moment of time. The path they followed began to slope gently downward, winding between stones that grew larger and more numerous until Lumineth realized they were walking through what must once have been the bed of an ancient river. The rocks beneath her feet were worn smooth by ages of water flow, each one shaped by patience and persistence into something beautiful. Some were speckled with crystals that caught the filtered light and threw it back in tiny rainbows, creating the illusion that she was walking through a field of scattered stars. Ahead, the stag had stopped beside a cluster of silver birch trees whose bark peeled in curling sheets like pages from some enormous book written by time itself. He turned to look at her with those deep, knowing eyes, and in them she saw something new. Excitement, perhaps, or the deep satisfaction that comes from successfully guiding someone to exactly where they need to be. His entire bearing seemed to say, "We are almost there, and you are ready." The forest opened before them into a clearing unlike any Lumineth had ever imagined. It was perfectly circular, as if someone had drawn it with a divine compass, surrounded by trees that stood like silent guardians with their branches intertwined overhead to form a living dome. The grass here was softer than velvet, cushioning each step with the accumulated tenderness of earth that had been undisturbed for centuries. In the center of this magical space, steam rose in gentle spirals from what appeared to be a natural spring. Its waters so clear they seemed like liquid crystal. The surface barely moved, disturbed only by the occasional bubble rising from unknown depths below each one, catching light and releasing it in a tiny celebration of emergence. The sound she had been hearing was this: the gentle conversation between water and stone, between depths and surface, between the mysteries below and the world above. Around the spring's edge, stones had been arranged in patterns that seemed both random and perfectly intentional, like a mandala, created by some benevolent force that understood the deepest principles of harmony. Moss covered many of these stones in emerald cushions so inviting that Lumineth felt an immediate urge to sit and rest, to allow herself to be held by this place that felt more like a living embrace than any location she had ever encountered. The stag approached the water's edge and lowered his magnificent head to drink his reflection, joining with his physical form to create a moment of perfect symmetry. As he drank, ripples spread outward in concentric circles, each one carrying what seemed like tiny lights, as if the water itself was infused with stars or the compressed essence of moonbeams. When he raised his head, droplets clung to his chin like diamonds, and his eyes held a depth of contentment that made Lumineth understand why ancient peoples had worshipped creatures like him as messengers from divine realms. He stepped back from the spring and lay down in the soft grass, folding his legs beneath him with the fluid grace of water, finding its level, his antlers creating a crown against the backdrop of living green. The clearing seemed to breathe around them, the very air, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, matched the gentle bubbling of the spring, matched some cosmic tempo that connected all living things in an invisible symphony of existence. Lumineth felt her shoulders relaxing completely for the first time in months, felt the tight places in her chest opening like flowers that had been waiting for just this quality of light, this precise temperature of love. She moved toward the spring, each step feeling like a homecoming, like a return to some essential part of herself that had been waiting patiently for her to remember it existed. The water called to her not just with its promise of physical refreshment, but with something deeper, the offer of renewal, of return to the kind of peace that exists before worry is born, before the mind learns to create suffering from imagination. The steam rising from the water carried scents she couldn't name, but recognized somewhere deeper than memory. The smell of comfort itself, of safety and acceptance, and the kind of love that asks nothing in return. As she knelt beside the spring, she saw her reflection wavering in the gentle movement of the surface, but somehow it looked more like herself than any mirror had ever shown her, more true, more real, as if the water was reflecting not just her face, but her soul. As Lumineth gazed into the spring's crystalline depths, she began to see more than just her reflection. Layers of light seemed to move beneath the surface, swirling in patterns that reminded her of the aurora she had once witnessed on a winter night when sleep had eluded her, and she had walked outside to find the sky dancing with colors that had no earthly names. The water held that same quality of impossible beauty, as if it were a window into realms where peace was not just a feeling, but a living presence. She cupped her hands and slowly brought the water to her lips. The first taste was cool and sweet, but as it touched her tongue, she experienced something extraordinary. It was as if every cell in her body simultaneously remembered what it felt like to be perfectly nourished, perfectly loved, perfectly at rest. The water seemed to carry within it the essence of every peaceful moment that had ever existed, concentrated into liquid form and offered freely to anyone brave enough to seek it out. As she drank, warmth began to spread through her chest, not the heat of fever or exertion, but something gentler and more pervasive, the warmth of recognition of coming home to a part of herself she had forgotten existed. Her breathing deepened naturally, each inhalation seeming to draw in not just air, but serenity itself, each exhalation releasing tensions she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The stag watched her with patient eyes, his presence serving as both guardian and witness to this moment of transformation. His steady breathing created a rhythm that seemed to anchor the entire clearing in a state of perfect calm, as if he were some kind of living meditation bell, calling all who entered this space to remember their truest, most peaceful nature. Around the spring, she began to notice details that had escaped her attention before. Tiny flowers grew between the stones, so small they might have been overlooked entirely. Yet each one was perfect in its miniature beauty, petals like drops of sunlight, centers that seemed to hold entire galaxies in their depths. These flowers had no scent that she could detect, yet their presence filled the air with something that affected her more deeply than any fragrance, a quality of innocence and joy that spoke directly to the part of her soul that remembered being a child who found wonder in dewdrops and butterfly wings. She settled more comfortably beside the water, her legs folding naturally into a position that felt as if she had been born to sit exactly here in exactly this way. The moss beneath her was incredibly soft, like sitting on a cloud that had somehow taken root in the earth, and she felt supported not just physically, but in every possible way, emotionally, spiritually, existentially. This place seemed to say without words, You belong here. You are welcome. You are exactly as you should be." The gentle bubbling of the spring created a sound that was less heard than felt, a vibration that seemed to resonate in her bones and align every part of her being with its peaceful frequency. It was like listening to the earth's own lullaby, a song older than human language, yet perfectly comprehensible to the heart. Her eyelids grew heavy, not with tiredness, but with the kind of deep relaxation that comes when the nervous system finally remembers what safety feels like. Above them, the canopy swayed gently in breezes, so soft they felt like whispered blessings. Leaves rustled with a sound like gentle applause, as if the trees themselves were celebrating her arrival at this sacred place. Occasionally, a single leaf would spiral down from the heights above, landing on the water's surface and floating there like a small boat carrying prayers to unknown destination. The light in the clearing had a quality she had never experienced before, not harsh or demanding, but infinitely gentle, seeming to emanate from the water itself as much as from the sun filtered through leaves above. Everything was illuminated with perfect clarity, yet nothing cast sharp shadows. It was the kind of light that exists in the most peaceful dreams, where every detail is vivid yet somehow soft, where beauty is enhanced rather than analyzed. As she sat in this perfect stillness, Lumineth began to understand something fundamental about healing that had eluded her before. It was not something to be grasped or achieved through effort, but rather something to be allowed, something that happened naturally when all the obstacles to peace were gently removed. The spring was not healing her through any active force, but simply by providing a space so perfectly attuned to serenity that her natural state of wholeness could finally remember itself. Her hands, which had carried so much tension from her work as a healer in the village, now rested palm up on her knees in a gesture of complete openness and receptivity. The tingling she had felt earlier had transformed into something deeper, not just physical sensation, but awareness itself, becoming more refined, more sensitive to the subtle currents of peace that flowed through this sacred space like invisible rivers of light. The stag shifted slightly, settling even more deeply into his resting position, and the small sound of his movement seemed to trigger a wave of even deeper relaxation throughout the clearing. Birds in the surrounding trees grew quieter, their songs becoming more like whispered conversations, as if they too were being drawn into the profound peace that emanated from the healing spring. Time seemed to slow and thicken each moment, stretching out like honey poured from a great height, allowing Lumineth to rest fully in the present, without any concern for past or future. Her thoughts, usually so busy with the concerns of healing others and managing her daily responsibilities, began to settle like sediment in still water, leaving her consciousness clear and transparent as the spring itself. In this crystalline awareness, she began to perceive the forest around her with extraordinary clarity. She could sense the root systems beneath the earth, feel the slow circulation of sap through tree trunks, hear the almost inaudible conversations between plants as they shared nutrients and information through networks more sophisticated than any human technology. The entire ecosystem revealed itself as a single breathing organism, and she understood that she was not separate from it, but part of its infinite, interconnected wholeness. As the afternoon light shifted through the canopy above, painting the clearing in ever-changing patterns of gold and emerald, Lumineth felt herself sinking deeper into a state of consciousness she had never experienced before. It was as if she were dissolving into the very essence of peace itself, becoming less a person sitting beside a spring and more a focal point through which the forest's ancient wisdom could flow and express itself. The water beside her continued its gentle conversation with the stones, each bubble that rose to the surface, carrying with it what felt like messages from the deep places of the earth. Whispers of patience learned over geological time, stories of underground rivers that had flowed in darkness for millennia before finding their way to this perfect expression of emergence. She found herself listening not just with her ears, but with her entire being, as if every cell had become a tiny receptor for the spring's teaching. In this expanded awareness, she began to perceive other visitors to the sacred space. A family of foxes emerged from the underbrush, their red coats like living flames against the green backdrop. They moved with the fluid grace of creatures who belonged so completely to their environment that they seemed to be extensions of the forest itself. The largest, a magnificent vixen with eyes like amber jewels, approached the spring's edge and drank deeply, her reflection merging with the water's surface in a dance of reality and image. The foxes showed no fear of Lumineth's presence, treating her as they might a boulder or fallen log, part of the natural landscape, worthy of acknowledgement but requiring no special caution. This acceptance filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with recognition. She was being welcomed into the community of beings that understood how to exist without struggle, how to be present without effort, how to live in harmony with the rhythms that governed all life. A great blue heron descended from the sky, its wings spanning wider than Lumineth was tall, yet its landing beside the spring was so gentle it barely disturbed the surface tension of the water. The bird stood motionless for long minutes, its reflection creating a symmetrical image of perfect stillness. In its patient waiting, Lumineth saw a masterclass in the art of being, how to remain alert yet relaxed, present yet unattached, ready for whatever might come while being completely content with what was. The interplay between all these creatures and the spring created a living mandala, a constantly shifting pattern of beings drawn together by their shared recognition of this place as a source of renewal. Each arrival and departure happened with such natural timing that it seemed choreographed by some invisible conductor who understood the precise rhythm of peace itself. As the hours passed, though time seemed irrelevant in this space where clocks had no meaning, Lumineth noticed that her perception of the spring was changing. What had initially appeared to be simply clear water now revealed layers of depth and complexity that spoke to some more subtle sense than vision. The water seemed to contain light that originated from within rather than being reflected from above, as if the spring were a doorway to some realm where illumination was the natural state of being. This inner light pulsed gently, creating waves of luminescence that moved through the water like slow, graceful dancers. Each pulse seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat, creating a feedback loop between her physiological rhythms and the mysterious energies that flowed through this sacred place. She felt as if she were being gently tuned like a musical instrument, being adjusted to perfect pitch by hands that understood harmony better than any human teacher. The stag, who had remained a constant presence throughout her time at the spring, now lifted his head and gazed at her with an expression that seemed to hold all the compassion in the world. In his eyes, she saw reflected not just her physical form, but something deeper. the luminous being she truly was beneath all the layers of worry and effort that daily life had accumulated around her like sediment around a pearl. With movements so slow they seemed to unfold in a dream, the stag rose to his feet and approached the water's edge. He lowered his magnificent antlers until their tips touched the surface, creating tiny ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. As these circles expanded, they seemed to carry with them some blessing or activation, changing the very quality of the water's energy in ways that Lumineth could feel but not explain. The spring began to glow more brightly, its inner light increasing until the entire clearing was bathed in a soft radiance that made everything appear touched by moonlight, even though the sun still filtered through the leaves above. This luminescence had a quality of pure gentleness, like the light that exists in the most peaceful moments of dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and day, and all possibilities seem equally beautiful. In this enhanced illumination, Lumineth could see streams of light flowing beneath the water's surface, moving in spirals and patterns too complex for her mind to track, but perfectly comprehensible to her heart. These currents of light seemed to be the source of the spring's healing power, carrying within them the distilled essence of every peaceful moment that had ever existed, concentrated into liquid form and offered freely to any who approached with genuine openness. She leaned forward and cupped her hands again, bringing the glowing water to her lips. This time, as she drank, she felt not just the physical sensation of cool liquid, but the actual transmission of peace itself into her being. Each swallow seemed to dissolve another layer of the tension and anxiety that had become so familiar she had forgotten they were not natural parts of her identity. The water flowed through her system like liquid starlight, illuminating pathways of awareness she had never known existed. She could feel it moving through her bloodstream, carrying its message of profound rest to every organ, every muscle, every cell. Her nervous system, which had been chronically activated by years of caring for others while neglecting her own need for renewal, began to remember what true relaxation felt like. As this deep healing unfolded within her, the forest around the clearing seemed to respond with its own wave of increased harmony. The songs of birds became more melodious, the whisper of wind through leaves more musical, the very air itself more nourishing. It was as if her personal healing was contributing to the healing of the entire ecosystem, creating a feedback loop of renewal that benefited all beings present. The foxes, still resting near the spring's edge, seemed to glow with their own inner light, their fur catching and reflecting the water's radiance in ways that made them appear more like spirits of the forest than ordinary animals. The heron's blue-grey feathers shimmered with an almost metallic sheen, as if each one had been dipped in liquid moonbeams and allowed to dry in starlight. The transformation that had begun within Lumineth now seemed to extend beyond the boundaries of her physical form, creating ripples of peace that moved outward through the clearing like gentle waves on a still pond. The very stones around the spring's edge began to emit their own soft glow, as if her healing had awakened some dormant quality within them, some ancient memory of their role as guardians of this sacred space. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to sink even deeper into the profound stillness that surrounded her. Behind her eyelids, she could see patterns of light that moved like living mandalas, swirling and flowing in designs too beautiful and complex for her conscious mind to follow, but perfectly comprehensible to some deeper part of her awareness. These inner visions seemed to be showing her the actual structure of peace itself, the geometric patterns that underlay all states of profound calm and healing. The spring's gentle bubbling had evolved into something that sounded almost like music, not melody in any conventional sense, but rhythm and harmony that spoke directly to the part of her consciousness that existed before language, before thought, before the learned habit of seeing herself as separate from the world around her. This ancient music seemed to be calling her home to a state of being she had known before birth and would remember again after death, the timeless awareness that was her truest identity. As she listened to this water song, Lumineth felt her breathing naturally deepen and slow until each inhalation seemed to draw in not just air, but the very essence of tranquility itself. Her exhales became longer and more complete, releasing not just carbon dioxide, but layers of accumulated stress and worry that had been stored in her body for months, perhaps years. With each breath cycle, she felt herself becoming more transparent, more permeable to the healing energies that flowed through this sacred grove. The stag, still standing at the water's edge, with his antlers touching the surface, seemed to be conducting some kind of ceremony that required no words, no formal structure, only the pure intention of facilitating healing. Through their connection, Lumineth could sense his deep satisfaction at having successfully guided another soul to this place of renewal. His presence radiated the contentment of a being who had found his perfect purpose and was fulfilling it with complete devotion. Around the clearing's perimeter, she became aware of other presences, not visible to ordinary sight, but perceptible to the expanded awareness that the spring's waters had awakened within her. These seemed to be the spirits of all who had found healing at this place over the centuries, their essence somehow woven into the very fabric of the location. Their collective presence created a field of support and encouragement that made her feel held by an invisible community of souls who understood the journey she was undertaking. The light emanating from the water continued to intensify, but rather than becoming harsh or overwhelming, it somehow managed to grow more gentle even as it grew brighter. This paradox of illumination that increased in intensity while becoming softer and more nurturing seemed to represent something fundamental about the nature of true healing. How real transformation brought not harshness or dramatic change, but rather a gradual return to the natural state of peace that had always existed beneath the surface of her everyday consciousness. As this extraordinary light flowed through her system, Lumineth felt old patterns of anxiety and over-effort literally dissolving like ice melting in warm sunlight. Parts of her personality that she had thought were permanent fixtures, the constant need to help others even at the expense of her own well-being, the chronic tension in her shoulders from carrying responsibilities that weren't truly hers, the restless quality of mind that made sleep elusive. All of these began to reveal themselves as temporary accumulations rather than essential aspects of who she was. Beneath these dissolving layers, she discovered a self that was profoundly at peace, naturally radiant, effortlessly loving. This wasn't a new self that she needed to create or achieve, but rather her original nature temporarily obscured, but never truly lost. The spring's waters seemed designed specifically to wash away whatever was not essential, leaving only what had always been true, the luminous awareness that was her deepest identity. The healing energy continued to move through her in waves, each one carrying away more of what no longer served and revealing more of what had always been perfect. Her hands, which had grown warm during her time at the spring, now felt as if they were made of light itself, transparent and weightless, yet somehow more real than they had ever felt before. She understood, without being told, that this was how her hands were meant to feel when she worked as a healer, not as instruments of her own will or effort, but as channels through which the universe's natural healing energy could flow. The foxes near the water's edge had settled into what appeared to be their own meditation, their breathing synchronized with the rhythm of the spring's gentle bubbling. Their presence added another layer to the healing field that surrounded the sacred water, creating a community of beings all participating in the same fundamental act of returning to peace. The great heron remained motionless as a statue carved from patience itself, its reflection in the water creating a perfect mirror image that seemed to represent the harmony between the seen and unseen worlds. In this state of expanded awareness, Lumineth began to perceive the healing spring as part of a vast network of sacred sites scattered across the earth, each one serving as an acupuncture point in the planet's subtle energy system. She could sense the underground streams that connected this spring to others, carrying healing energy across vast distances and making it available to any who sought it with sincere intention. The spring was both completely local and absolutely universal, rooted in this specific place, yet connected to the infinite source from which all healing flowed. The water itself seemed to be showing her visions of its origins, beginning as snow on distant mountaintops, melting in the spring warmth and joining countless other droplets in their journey toward the sea, but somehow being called to pause here in this perfect clearing to serve as medicine for souls weary from too much seeking and not enough resting. Each molecule of water carried within it the memory of clouds and rain, of journeys through dark underground spaces, of patience and persistence, and the willingness to flow wherever the deepest wisdom directed. As these revelations unfolded within her consciousness, Lumineth felt her sense of individual identity continuing to soften and expand. She was still herself, but that self had grown large enough to include the foxes and the heron, the stag and the ancient trees, the water and the stones, even the invisible presences that blessed this place with their continued love and attention. She was simultaneously more herself than she had ever been, and less concerned with the boundaries that had previously defined her identity. The afternoon light, filtering through the canopy, had taken on a golden quality that made everything in the clearing appear touched by divinity. Each leaf, each blade of grass, each ripple on the water's surface seemed to glow with its own inner radiance, as if the ordinary world had suddenly revealed its true nature as a manifestation of pure beauty and intelligence. This wasn't hallucination or fantasy, but rather a glimpse of reality as it actually was when perceived through consciousness that had been purified by contact with the sacred. As the golden hour deepened around the sacred clearing, Lumineth experienced a shift so subtle yet profound that it seemed to happen between one heartbeat and the next. The boundary between her inner experience and the world around her dissolved completely, leaving her in a state of consciousness where she was simultaneously the observer, and the observed the healer, and the healed the seeker, and that which was sought. This wasn't confusion, but rather the ultimate clarity, the recognition that all apparent separations were merely illusions created by a mind that had forgotten its true nature. The spring's luminous waters now appeared to her as liquid consciousness itself, each molecule containing infinite depths of wisdom and compassion. As she gazed into its crystalline depths, she could see not just her reflection, but the reflection of every being who had ever sought healing, every soul who had ever yearned for peace, every heart that had ever been wounded and then made whole again. The water was a mirror of universal experience, showing her that her own journey toward healing was part of a vast cosmic symphony in which every note was essential. The stag slowly lifted his antlers from the water's surface, droplets falling from their tips like diamonds returning to their source. As each drop merged with the spring, tiny explosions of light spread outward in concentric circles, creating a visual representation of how individual healing contributed to the healing of the whole. His dark eyes met hers across the luminous space, and in that gaze she saw reflected the accumulated wisdom of all creatures who had learned to live in harmony with the natural rhythms of existence. Without any conscious decision, Lumineth found herself rising to her feet, her movements flowing like water itself, each gesture emerging from the same deep stillness that governed the spring's gentle bubbling. Her body felt different now, not heavier or lighter, but somehow more substantial and more ethereal, at the same time as if she had been recalibrated to exist simultaneously in the physical world and in dimensions of experience that had no names in human language. The clearing around her had transformed into what could only be described as a living temple, though no human hands had shaped it. The trees that formed its circular boundary swayed in perfect unison, their branches weaving patterns overhead that created windows for starlight to enter even though the sun had not yet set. Through these natural skylights, she could see the first stars appearing in the deepening sky, each one seeming to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, as if her personal healing had somehow attuned her to the cosmic frequencies that connected all things. The air itself had become visible not as something separate from herself, but as an extension of her own being, flowing in and out of her lungs in a continuous dance of giving and receiving. Each breath was simultaneously hers and not hers, individual and universal, finite and infinite. She could feel the oxygen she exhaled being gratefully received by the plants around her, could sense their carbon dioxide offerings being transformed within her own cells into energy and life force. The foxes, who had been resting peacefully near the water's edge, now rose and began to move in a slow circle around the spring, their steps creating a rhythm that seemed to match the pulse of the earth itself. They weren't performing any deliberate ceremony, but rather allowing their natural instincts to express the celebration that occurred whenever healing reached its completion. Their red coats caught the light from the water and reflected it back, amplified, creating moving flames of joy that danced around the sacred space. The great heron spread its magnificent wings without taking flight, holding them outstretched in a gesture that seemed to embrace the entire clearing and all who dwelt within it. In this position, with its wings forming a living arch above the spring, it resembled nothing so much as a bridge between heaven and earth, facilitating the flow of healing energy between the celestial realms and the physical world. Its presence transformed the entire space into a kind of outdoor cathedral where the sacred and mundane revealed themselves to be one and the same. As Lumineth watched these spontaneous expressions of natural celebration, she felt her own body beginning to respond to the same mysterious impulse. Her arms rose of their own accord, her hands moving in gestures she had never learned but somehow knew perfectly, as if she were participating in a dance that predated human culture, a movement vocabulary written into the very structure of consciousness itself. Each gesture felt like a prayer, made physical, an offering of gratitude for the healing she had received. The water of the spring began to sing, not metaphorically, but with actual audible tones that harmonized with the natural acoustics of the clearing to create music of indescribable beauty. The sound was like all the most peaceful moments she had ever experienced compressed into pure audio. The whisper of wind through summer grass, the gentle lapping of waves on a still lake, the soft breathing of a sleeping child, the first birdsong of dawn. Yet it was also entirely unique, a melody that belonged to this place and this moment and could never be replicated elsewhere. This water song seemed to activate something dormant within the stones that ringed the spring, causing them to emit their own subtle tones that blended with the water's melody to create harmonies of crystalline purity. The entire clearing became a natural amphitheater where the elements themselves performed a symphony of healing, each note designed to dissolve whatever remained of separation between the listener and the infinite source of peace. Lumineth felt this music entering her through every pore, not just heard, but absorbed at the cellular level, reprogramming her nervous system to remember its original setting of profound calm and effortless joy. The chronic tension patterns that had become so familiar, she had stopped noticing them, simply melted away, leaving her feeling buoyant and weightless, as if she could float on air, or perhaps had always been floating, and was only now remembering this natural state. The last rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy had taken on colors that didn't exist in the ordinary spectrum, hues that spoke directly to the soul rather than the eyes, shades of contentment and serenity that painted everything they touched with the glow of perfect well-being. The clearing existed in its own pocket of time, where sunset could last for hours if needed, where the usual rules of physics bent gently to accommodate whatever was required for complete healing to occur. In this extended golden hour, Lumineth began to understand that her time at the spring was approaching a natural completion, not because she was being asked to leave, but because she had been so thoroughly renewed that she was ready to carry this peace back into the world. The healing she had received was not meant to be hoarded, but rather shared, not a possession to be protected, but a gift to be passed on to others who were still searching for their own path to the healing waters. The stag approached her once more, moving with the same unhurried grace that had characterized all his actions, but now there was something different in his bearing, a quality of recognition, as if he were greeting not a visitor, but a fellow guardian of sacred spaces. When he reached her side, he gently nuzzled her hand with his soft nose, and in that simple gesture she felt the formal completion of her initiation into whatever mystery this place represented. Around them, the forest had grown quiet in the way that natural spaces do when something significant is concluding, not the silence of endings, but the hush of perfect fulfillment, the peace that comes when everything that needed to happen has happened exactly as it should. Even the spring's gentle bubbling had softened to barely a whisper, as if it too were resting in the satisfaction of another soul successfully guided to wholeness. The moment of perfect communion between Lumineth and the stag seemed to extend infinitely, existing outside the normal flow of time, in a space where healing could ripen like fruit on invisible trees. As they stood together beside the luminous spring, she felt the final layers of her old identity gently dissolving, not violently or with any sense of loss, but like snow melting in warm sunshine, revealing the green shoots of new growth that had been waiting beneath the surface all along. The stag's eyes held a message that required no words. It was time to begin the journey back to the world of humans, but she would not be returning as the same person who had entered these woods. The healing waters had worked their ancient magic, transforming her from someone who sought peace into someone who embodied it, from a healer who worked through effort and technique into a channel through which the universe's own healing intelligence could flow without obstruction. With movements that seemed choreographed by the same invisible force that guided the dance of planets around stars, the stag turned toward the path that would lead them out of the sacred clearing. But before taking the first step, he paused and looked back at the spring, his entire bearing expressing a gratitude so profound it seemed to shimmer in the air around him. Lumineth understood intuitively that this was how one should always leave sacred spaces, not with hurried departure, but with reverent acknowledgement of the gifts received. She followed his example, turning to face the spring for what she somehow knew would be the last time, at least in this particular form of seeking. The water continued to glow with its inner light, but now she could see that this luminescence was not separate from the light that had been kindled within her own being. The spring had not given her something foreign to herself, but rather had helped her remember the radiance that was her birthright, the peace that was her natural state, the love that was her truest identity. As she gazed into the crystalline depths one final time, the water's surface began to still, completely becoming a perfect mirror that reflected not just her physical form, but something far more essential. The luminous being she had always been, beneath the accumulated layers of worldly concern and spiritual seeking. In this ultimate reflection, she saw herself as she truly was, not separate from the source of healing, but inseparable from it. Not seeking peace from outside herself, but recognizing it as the very ground of her being. The foxes, who had completed their circular dance around the spring, now arranged themselves in a semicircle as if to bid her farewell. Their amber eyes reflected the same deep knowing she had seen in the stag's gaze, the recognition that passes between beings who understand themselves to be expressions of the same underlying consciousness. Their presence felt like a blessing, a reminder that she would never again be truly alone, because she now carried within herself the awareness of connection to all life. The great heron folded its wings with a whisper of feathers that sounded like gentle applause, then stepped to the very edge of the spring and dipped its beak into the luminous water. When it raised its head, droplets of liquid light clung to its bill like tiny stars, and for a moment its entire being seemed to glow with the same inner radiance that now flowed through Lumineth's transformed awareness. The bird's action felt like a final benediction, a sealing of the healing that had taken place. With a grace that had become as natural to her as breathing, Lumineth knelt beside the spring and cupped her hands one last time. The water that flowed into her palms seemed even more luminous than before, as if it had been concentrated to its most potent essence, specifically for this moment of parting. As she brought it to her lips, She felt not just the physical sensation of cool liquid, but the actual transmission of a commission, a calling to serve as a bridge between this realm of pure peace and the world of human seeking. The water tasted different now, not just of purity and healing, but of responsibility and joy. Intermingled the sweet burden of one who has been entrusted with gifts meant to be shared rather than hoarded. She understood without being told that she was drinking from the same source that had nourished every true healer throughout history, joining an invisible lineage of beings who had learned to allow the universe's healing intelligence to work through them rather than trying to heal through personal will alone. As she rose from her kneeling position, Lumineth felt the clearing itself shifting around her, not physically but energetically, as if it were gently releasing her from its embrace, while simultaneously ensuring that she would carry its essence with her always. The light that had suffused the space began to concentrate itself within her own being, not departing from the spring, but rather establishing a permanent connection between her heart and this source of renewal. The stag began to move toward the forest path, his steps creating a rhythm that seemed to summon the very molecules of peace from the air and weave them into a protective field around her newly sensitized awareness. Each hoofbeat on the soft earth sounded like a gentle bell, calling her consciousness to remain anchored in the profound stillness she had discovered while still being able to function in the more chaotic energies of human society. As they left the circular clearing behind, the foxes and heron arranged themselves in what appeared to be a living mandala around the spring, their presence ensuring that its healing energies would continue to be tended and protected. Lumineth felt their guardianship as a great gift, knowing that this sacred space would be here for future seekers who needed to remember their own essential wholeness, their own capacity for profound peace. The path through the forest seemed different now, not because the trees or stones had changed, but because she was walking it with transformed perception. Every step felt like a meditation in motion, her feet seeming to find the earth with perfect balance, her body moving with the fluid grace of water flowing over smooth stones. The boundary between herself and her environment had become so permeable that walking felt more like floating, more like being carried by invisible currents of love than making any effort to move forward. Above them, the first stars were becoming visible through the canopy, their light seeming to respond to the radiance that now flowed through her being. She could feel their ancient songs resonating in her bones, could sense the vast network of cosmic intelligence that connected every point of light in the infinite darkness. The healing she had received at the spring had somehow attuned her to frequencies that most humans never perceived, opening channels of awareness that would allow her to serve as a more effective conduit for the healing energies that constantly sought expression in the world. The stag's presence beside her felt like walking with wisdom itself, his every movement a teaching in how to exist in perfect harmony with the natural rhythms of life. Through their continued connection, she could sense his deep satisfaction at having successfully guided another soul through the transformation that the healing spring offered to those ready to receive it. His joy felt like sunlight warming her from within, a celebration of the eternal cycle of seeking and finding that gave meaning to all existence. As they moved deeper into the forest, heading back toward the realm of human activity and concern, Lumineth felt no sadness at leaving the sacred spring behind. Instead, she experienced the profound contentment that comes from knowing that what had been found could never be lost, that the peace she had discovered was not dependent on any external location, but was now permanently established as the foundation of her being. The healing waters had worked their ultimate magic, not by taking her away from the world, but by preparing her to engage with it from a place of such deep peace that she could offer healing simply through her presence, simply by being a living reminder of the tranquility that was every being's birthright. The journey back through the whispering woods unfolded like a meditation in reverse, each step carrying Lumineth further from the physical location of the healing spring while simultaneously deepening her connection to the peace it had awakened within her. The stag moved beside her with the patient rhythm of one who understood that true arrivals happen not when destinations are reached, but when the traveler has been so thoroughly transformed by the journey that every place becomes sacred ground. As they walked, the forest itself seemed to participate in her transition back to the human world, each grove and glade offering its own gentle teaching about how to maintain inner stillness while engaging with external activity. The trees whispered secrets of how to remain rooted in peace while reaching toward whatever light was available, how to bend with life's winds without losing one's essential nature, how to offer shelter and sustenance to others while continuing to grow toward one's own highest potential. The path beneath her feet felt different now, not because its contours had changed, but because she was walking it with the feet of someone who had remembered how to touch the earth without grasping how to move through space, without disturbing the fundamental stillness that existed at the heart of all motion. Each footfall seemed to generate tiny waves of tranquility that rippled outward through the forest floor, blessing every root and seedling. With the peace she now carried within her transformed being. Night was settling over the woods with the gentle progression of someone drawing soft blankets over a sleeping child. The darkness bringing not the absence of light, but a different quality of illumination. The subtle radiance that emanates from everything when perceived through consciousness that has been purified by contact with the sacred. Stars appeared between the leaves like scattered diamonds on black velvet, each one pulsing with a light that seemed to acknowledge her presence, to welcome her back into the cosmic community of beings who had learned to shine from within. The stag's breathing beside her created a rhythm that seemed to connect all the sounds of the night forest into one vast symphony of peace. The gentle rustle of nocturnal creatures going about their business, the whisper of wind through branches heavy with sleep, the distant call of an owl whose voice carried the wisdom of darkness as a sacred teacher rather than something to be feared. She found her own breathing naturally harmonizing with this forest orchestra, her exhales releasing the last traces of the person she had been before, drinking from the healing waters. As they approached the edge of the woods, where the ancient trees began to give way to the rolling meadows that surrounded the village of whispered echoes, Lumineth felt no anxiety about returning to the world of human concerns and responsibilities. The spring's gift had been complete. She now carried within herself an unshakable foundation of peace that would allow her to serve others from a place of overflow rather than depletion, to offer healing that flowed through her rather than from her limited personal resources. The meadow grass sparkled with dew that caught starlight and held it like tiny mirrors reflecting the infinite, each blade a perfect meditation on how to remain flexible while reaching always toward the light. As they walked through this sea of liquid silver, the stag's pace began to slow, and Lumineth understood that their time together was approaching its natural conclusion. The gratitude she felt toward this magnificent creature who had guided her to such profound healing seemed too vast for any gesture to contain, Yet somehow her simple presence beside him communicated everything that needed to be shared between souls who had participated together in mystery. At the meadow's far edge, where a small hill overlooked the sleeping village below, the stag finally came to a stop. The lights in the cottage windows twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing a human heart that was working its way toward the same peace she had found at the spring. From this elevated perspective, she could see the beauty in the human endeavor, the courage required to seek healing in a world that often seemed designed to disturb inner quiet, the precious vulnerability of beings who dared to hope for something better than mere survival. The stag turned to face her one final time, his eyes reflecting not just starlight, but the deep satisfaction of a mission completed, a sacred duty fulfilled with perfect grace. In his gaze, she saw herself as she truly was now, not someone who had been to the healing spring, but someone who had become the healing spring, carrying its peace within her as naturally as carrying her own heartbeat. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and infinitely gentle. Without ceremony, yet with profound recognition of what was ending and beginning, the stag lowered his magnificent head in what could only be called a bow, a gesture of respect from one guardian of peace to another. Then, with the same fluid grace that had marked all his movements, he turned and disappeared back into the forest, becoming one with the shadows and starlight, until Lumineth could no longer distinguish his form from the dreaming trees. She stood alone on the hilltop, but the word alone no longer carried its old meaning of separation or isolation. She was alone in the way that the moon is alone in its fullness, complete in itself, yet connected to everything through invisible threads of light and gravity and love. The peace that flowed through her being was so stable, so unshakable, that she knew it would remain constant regardless of what challenges or joys awaited her in the village below. The night air carried the scent of jasmine from the cottage gardens, mixing with the wilder fragrances of the forest to create a perfume that spoke of the marriage between human cultivation and natural wildness, between effort and surrender, between seeking and finding. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with this sweet medicine, feeling it nourish not just her body, but her commitment to serve as a bridge between the realm of perfect peace she had discovered and the world of human hearts still learning to trust in love. As she began her descent toward the village, each step felt like a gentle return to dreams, her feet finding the familiar path through the dark, not by sight, but by some deeper navigation system that had been activated by her time at the spring. The cottages grew larger as she approached their windows, glowing with the warm light of hearth fires and oil lamps, promising comfort and rest for one who had traveled far beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience and returned transformed. Her own cottage waited at the end of a lane lined with sleeping flowers, its door standing slightly ajar, as if it had been expecting her return all along. Inside, she could see the soft glow of embers in the fireplace, the familiar shapes of her healing herbs and crystals, the simple furnishings that would now serve not just her personal needs, but her expanded capacity to offer sanctuary to others who came seeking the same peace she had found. As Lumineth Dawnweaver crossed the threshold of her home, she carried with her the eternal gift of the healing spring, not as memory, but as living presence, not as past experience, but as constant reality. The peace she had discovered would flow through her, always offering itself freely to every being she encountered, creating endless ripples of healing that would spread far beyond what her human awareness could ever comprehend. In the quiet of her cottage, surrounded by the familiar yet somehow transformed objects of her daily life, she settled into the deepest sleep she had ever known, a rest so complete that it seemed to embrace not just her individual being, but all the seeking souls in all the villages, under all the stars, drawing them gently into the same infinite peace that had found its perfect expression in a sacred spring hidden in the heart of the whispering woods, where healing waited always for those ready to remember their own essential wholeness.